He's the current Senior Lecturer in Performance and Innovation in PE and Sports Sciences at University of Limerick. Our discussion today will be looking into the insights in how to unlock athletic excellence and maximise on-field performance. Welcome, John. Thanks for jumping on, mate. Looking forward to the chat.
No, pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, Jack.
For those that aren't aware of your work, John, do you mind providing a background of how you got into the industry and the work experiences you've done from the start to now?
I guess how I got into it was I was always into it. A lot of like most people out there, played a lot of sports as a kid competitively. That stayed through to adulthood. And really, again, like a lot of people, really motivated by trying to be better physically, technically, skillfully. Um, So yeah, and then I was a coach pretty early. I was predominantly in combat sports by the time I hit my kind of early 20s. So and I was coaching early, maybe age 22, 23. So that was running parallel with my competitive career, and that was a pretty long and experience-full, if not successful, career. Uh, a sports science degree started up in our local university when I was kind of coming around 26 or so, mid 20s, and I said I'd have a go at that, and kind of kicked off from there. Really, uh, once I graduated from that, I was lucky enough to, because I was kind of in the sports system in Ireland at the time as a competitor. Um, yeah, I went straight into work with um, one of the national institutes who at the time looked after Olympic prep, Paralympic prep. Did a bit of work there for 3 or 4 years. Decided I needed to move on. Decided I need to learn something more. Moved to Edinburgh. Did a master's in strength and conditioning over there. Came back. Came to Ireland. Lots of different contracts, trying to make ends meet like everyone else. Around 2004, just after the Athens Games, I went to Athens with the Paralympic team um, as a coach and as an S&C. After the Paralympics, got a role with um, British Athletics, and it was the role at the time was the head of strength and conditioning. Worked there through the Beijing cycle. Went to Beijing. We had some really good success there. Worked with some really good athletes. Some two silver medalists specifically, horizontal jumps and high jumps. Came back. I know this has turned into a long saga, but you asked for the details, so
Yeah.
uh, we were coming in then to the 2012 cycle. I worked on with that. In just around 2012, I transitioned from working as a full-time practitioner to working in a university, but with a kind of a contract that I could go and contract out to sports teams and so on. Um, so yeah, I've been lucky enough to, since that time, that was around 2012, work with a number of really good athletes and teams, a couple of world champions in different sports, went to a Rugby World Cup, went to a Football World Cup, and all the time the university work has been tipping away in the background. I guess what I do in the university, I pretty much work from this room. I work remotely, and I have done for the past 10 years or so. And my brief is specifically to work. We run a course called it's a professional doctorate in performance and innovation, and it's for folks who are maybe mid-career professionals. They've been around the block a couple of times already, not necessarily interested in an academic degree, but want to challenge themselves to some higher level education, some applied CPD. So yeah, so I'm not a practitioner anymore, but I work really closely with practitioners. So I guess for me, it's the next best thing, and work with a lot of interesting folks from all walks, a lot in sports, NFL, English Premier League, a couple of the European leagues in kind of the major team sports, but then also people in kind of health domains, education domains. And I guess the key theme that unites them all is they're trying to drive some innovation, pressure test the innovation, validate the innovation. So So yeah, it keeps me thinking, keeps me interested, and it's a kind of diverse group. So yeah, that's pretty entertaining for someone like me.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds like it. Plenty of variation of people with different roles. How big's the group?
Well, this in I left out a bit. I moved university from the UK to an Irish university in the past 18 months or so. So we just started the performance and innovation doctorate here 2 years ago, and that group is pretty big now. So it's maybe 45.
Oh wow.
So and again, all kinds of everything, different domains, but all characterized by a lot of time on task, a lot of experience, and all interested in pushing themselves to, you know, to drive change within their specific domain. So yeah, it's interesting for someone like me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'd be good to dive into that in a little bit more detail a bit later on. But going back to your journey as a coach and practitioner, who are some strong influences or mentors, if you like, that help shape your philosophy?
Oh, okay. I guess as a practitioner, a lot of coaches really, and those I'll throw out a few names in a minute, but a lot of those coaches were predominantly. It wasn't necessarily their success that influenced me, but more their approach, how they dealt with athletes, how they managed support staff. Yeah, basically what I would consider their professionalism and expertise. So let's. I, for some reason, training theory has been influenced a lot by track and field.
Mm.
You go way back, all the great track and field coaches from 30s, 40s, 50s, their names still keep coming up. And I've been influenced by track and field coaches. Throw out a couple of examples. Aston Moore is a British coach, um, coached a number of world champions, Olympic medalists, and I worked closely with Aston for a good 7 years or so. We worked, so he was obviously the technical coach, and I worked the conditioning side, the injury rehab, RTP type side. Uh, and in that time, we, World Championship gold, Olympic silver, European gold, World Championship silver. So successful, but yeah, successful uh, with athletes that had been in other camps but hadn't been successful. So it was worthwhile. From an
Mm.
endurance perspective, there's a coach working in Canada at the moment, but again, English coach originally called Mark Rowland. Um, I worked with him. At the time he was working with Mo Farah and about half a dozen other top UK endurance runners, and Mark himself was a Olympic medalist back in '88 in the steeplechase. And again, I learned a lot from him. Not so much technically. Obviously, learned some technical stuff, but more about just thought processes and openness to ideas. And for me, that's one of the things I guess that characterizes great coaches. It's it's not having these firm beliefs that are locked in, but more sets of ideas that shift as you learn, as you take in information. Now that's an easy thing to say, but having ideas that shift can be a blessing or a curse.
I just lost your audio. Yeah, I don't know. Did the cord come out or something? You're not on mute, but it's like the Bluetooth of. Did the headphones die? Oh no, they're. Yeah, it just cut out. Should be in the bottom right corner. You can go to the audio settings. You might need to change it to the computer audio. Yeah, weird. Yeah, it's still no audio. See if I can share screen. This section here, the settings. This would be the thing to change. It might be still in your, might be the headphones. What's the audio input? That might be the one that needs changing. Not sure if that helps. Mm. The only thing I can think of is we just try and. No, your video's not frozen. I can download this section of the podcast and then reset the computer and try and come back in that way. Oh, you can't hear me. All right, we'll go for that. There we go.
Yeah, okay, I got you. You have me.
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
That was strange. I'll
Ah,
just I'll note down when we edit it 11 minutes till 21, so then that way it can just flow on.
well, look, I kind of think I was rambling on a bit there anyway. So, I mean, I'm just looking at the clock, Jack, and I know that we're both probably getting a bit tight. Do you want to just have another go at this?
Yeah, we can. I'll just because I'll be able to use that first 10 minutes, and then we'll just continue on from where we were. Um, so I believe we're talking about track and field and how that influenced your career with the
Well,
mentors. Aston
well,
Ball.
okay. So I guess my question is, first of all, I think I was starting to ramble off there. That was a very long answer. I should have edited that in my head. Um, do you want to try this again? Try and reconvene this because I'm just looking at the clock and I know time is ticking on. What do
Yeah,
you think? I mean, I'd be happy. I don't know how you are. Obviously, it's a good time for me because it's early morning. So if you wanted to hit this tomorrow, we could.
yeah. It's a bit. Thursday's the
No,
only day I do it because my wife works. I do it from home,
yeah.
and she works in the clinic. So I'm happy to continue on. Like we can still go for another 30, 35 minutes. We'll still be able to get through the interview if you want.
Okay.
Otherwise,
Well,
we
look.
can.
Yeah. Maybe let's do that. If we could aim for maybe 40, 45.
Yeah. Yep.
But maybe if we start again, and I can do that 10 minutes in 3 or 4 minutes. If we
Yeah.
if we
Sure.
start, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Let me just. Does it make any difference headset on, headset off for your sound quality?
Don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like it's clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would think that I don't know. So the university sometimes has these kind of reboots, but normally they're
Uh,
scheduled. But that
right.
might have been it.
Yeah, because it's never happened before. I've never had that happen before where we couldn't unmute someone. Um, but things do
Well,
happen.
my screen flickered. I don't know if,
Uh,
if it was anything, it was, and then we couldn't hear one another.
yeah, okay. Yeah, so it's probably.
All right. Um, have you a coffee? Oh no, it's probably too late for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll have my HTO.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I can use the intro that we did at the start, so I guess we'll kick it off with
No, the only thing is I had headset on and now we're headset off. Is that okay?
yeah, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, because
Okay.
most people listen to it on the audio recording, but um, all right, I'll kick it off with so, hey John, along your journey, who have been some strong influences or mentors, if you like, that have helped shape your coaching philosophy?
Sorry. Okay. Just pause. Are we going to start from the start again? Like, do you want to ask about the journey first, and I'll kind of do a short version of that, and then go to the influences because I think that's the order we did it in originally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I thought it was just the so your background. You don't want me to use that you used that you discussed earlier.
Well, it was just kind of long and waffly. I can make that tighter.
Oh yeah, okay, all right. I'll kick off with that first question then.
Sorry, I'm an editor all the time. I'm always editing.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's good. So, John, for those that aren't aware of your work, mate, do you mind providing an update on, how you sort of got into the industry and all the work experiences you've done from the start to now?
Well, I guess getting into the industry wasn't a planned thing. It was just my life basically. From when I was a kid, I was into, I guess what you say, physical improvement. Played a lot of sports like like a lot of kids. Um, at decent levels. Coming into my kind of late teens, early 20s, I was getting more and more into combat sports. I was having some success uh, with those. Transition to being a coach. Started coaching around 22, 23. So that's quite a chunk of time ago. So good practical experience coming into my kind of early to mid 20s, and just luck of the draw. The local university here, 20 minutes away, started a sports science degree. At the time, I was kind of floundering around trying to find my way. Predominantly training at day, working at night, just kind of making ends meet. So I thought, okay, I like sports. I'll try this, and it went from there basically. So it wasn't a plan. It was an accidental thing. But if you like, the interest, the passion, all the practical experience of being a hard training, limited, injury-ridden athlete, all those kind of hard learning experiences. I had plenty of those before I got into the trade.
Very good. And yeah, for those starting out, I guess sports scientists, exercise scientists that have, yeah, like you said, there is a bit of early on in your adulthood, there is some floundering. I'm sure everyone experiences at some point where you're not sure which way to go. How important is it, if you think that you are passionate about working in elite sport, to take up coaching at some form, whether it be working with general population or your local football team, or but yeah, just I guess leading teams and coaching people early on in your career?
Yeah, well, I mean, all that experience stood me in good stead. Now, when I said coaching, I was coaching in kind of the local boxing club in the city I'm from. It wasn't flash, it wasn't high tech, it wasn't anything like that. It was hardcore, and it was pretty much the same with my training and competitive life as well. It was a lot of hard work, a lot of out of the spotlight grind that I think it's good to have behind you. It wasn't the best fun at the time, but it was enjoyable. When you're young and you're competitive and you think you can be really good and you're passionate about something. Yeah, it's good. It was a lot of hard work, but enjoyable.
And who have been some strong influences, John, over your career that have helped shape your philosophy, mentors, if you like?
Well, I guess I'm from kind of small town Ireland, so there wasn't really anyone around that was established in the field. But obviously, I had my local boxing coach is still a great friend of mine, and he was a big influence on me. A guy called Declan Fitzgerald. And then once I started working in the field, you start to meet some really good coaches, where good coaches isn't necessarily success. Good coaches is people who, for me, who were conscientious, were diligent, thought through what they were doing very carefully, were willing to change in the face of new information, respected the athletes, had good relationships. So a lot of these things that aren't necessarily medals won. Who's the famous athlete you coach, not that type of stuff, because a lot of that for me is luck of the draw, right place, right time, right athlete. And the athlete makes the coach more often than the coach makes the athlete. So my kind of criteria for a great coach would be all those other things, all those softer skills. And it's not even the technical delivery, because technical delivery and philosophy changes coach to coach to coach. Even within, I've worked across a range of sports at a high level, and even in track and field, if you take sprints, the philosophies change. They're different. There has to be something more. I've seen successful coaches in all the event groups that have very different philosophies if you're to compare this successful coach with this successful coach. So it's not like their mechanical delivery of sessions or design of programs is the same. There's something else going on. And I think that something else is their personality, their ability to engage, their ability to subtly convince the athlete that we're on a track here and this is a good track and this is going to lead to where you want to go. I think all of that stuff, all that non-physical stuff, is a fundamental driver of the physical outcomes that we, as coaches, historically lock ourselves in a dark room and try and plan out the training plan and all the nuts and bolts. I think we've over-egged how important that is, and we've under-egged how important all the relationship stuff, the communication stuff,
the coach being a good example, coach helping set the tone, but having the athlete at the center of their process. Just got to lock a door here because there might be invaders.
Yeah. That ability to influence those in front of you is who have been some of the strongest coaches, if you like, that have sort of stood out to you.
Well, I guess the strongest ones, I have worked with a couple of quite famous coaches in different team sports, as in, FIFA World Coach of the Year or very successful rugby coaches. But I take a lot of my, I guess, basic influences from track and field. And I don't ask me why, but track and field has always been really important in influencing other sports, even though it's completely different. Like if I specialize in 100 meters, how does that relate to playing a football match? But it just does have that influence and continues to have. So I was head of strength and conditioning for UK track and field coming into the Beijing cycle. And then I continued on up until 2012. And yeah, I worked with some really good coaches. There was a guy called Mark Rowland. He's currently in Canada. He spent the past few years, or maybe half a dozen, 10 years in the States. And before that, he coached in the UK endurance. He's coached a lot of people. When I was working with him, he was working with Mo Farah. This was in the build up to Beijing now, before Mo really broke. And he's just a really, really good coach. Again, had been brought up in the sport, knew the sport inside out, and just was a really good communicator. So Mark was good. Again, a lot of people, if you're outside track and field, won't have heard of him. Very well known within endurance circles in track and field. Another influence, Aston Moore. Again, previous Olympian, but an Olympian that had a hard time with injury. And I often think in my Labrador brain that athletes who nearly made it, or who didn't make it quite to their potential because of injury, that's a hell of a learning experience. And I'd much prefer, as a coach, prior athletes who had that history. Anytime I've seen an athlete who had a stellar career, with not a lot of pitfalls, not a lot of speed bumps in the road, and again, this is me jumping to a conclusion. The person who was injured, who had troubles, learns to adapt, learns to be versatile, learns robust psychology. The one who's just phenomenally talented, normally can't understand why you aren't phenomenally talented. And if this worked for me, it should work for you. And they just maybe haven't hit enough troubles in their athletic career to force them to start thinking outside the box. So again, this is a very simple, and please don't, this is a very simple metric, but the ex-athlete who's been injured, who's had hardship, I'd much prefer to be picking from that bunch of people than this bunch of people who had the spectacular careers and the multiple medals, etc., etc. Bit of a tangent there, but yeah.
Yeah, it ties in nicely what you said before about the importance of the technical aspects are important as a coach, but it's the personable ability to be able to connect and communicate with the athletes. And I guess if you've experienced hardship, you'll be able to empathise with athletes that are going through, whether it be a significant injury or loss in form, where things aren't going well, which is a big part of coaching as well, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And just that ability to think that it is, I'll tell you where I was going to go with this. One of the big experiences I had early on in my life was this is for the Athens cycle. I worked with the Irish Paralympic Association. And in Paralympics, a lot of your conventional, you have to reinvent training to suit the individual in front of you, because everyone is so obviously different and so obviously different levels of ability that you have to think more flexibly. You can say, you can't squat if, for example, you can't grip the bar, or maybe you've just one upper limb. You can't say do a fundamental exercise like a squat the way an able-bodied person would do it. So you need to be thinking outside the box. I need to be thinking about, well, what's fundamental here? Okay, well, maybe fundamental is I need to increase X, Y, or Z. How will I do that in a non-conventional way, in a way that suits this athlete? So I spent a few years, with lots of different para experience, and you get into the habit of, okay, I need to tear up all that convention and just invent something that works for this person right now. And then, at the same time, I was working with able-bodied athletes, and there you think, well, actually, they're just as different as the para athletes. It's just not as visibly obvious all the time. But you kind of get into that mindset. No, everything is a unique problem. I can't have this off-the-shelf solution that I'm going to deploy with you and then deploy with this person over here. And that gets you into the realm of, or just into the mindset of, okay, what's right for this person right now? Now, that's an easy question to ask, but before you can answer that, you need to get information. How do you get information? Okay, well, the obvious things are, we've lots of metrics. Okay. The other thing is, well, what are the athletes' beliefs? What do they feel works for them or doesn't work for them? And again, these are things that in some coaching cultures, again, it depends on the sport, tend to get neglected, tend to be, because we're kind of brought up to think that, well, it's what you do physically that fundamentally drives what you get physically, the physical adaptations. But I don't think that's the case at all. I think that your physical adaptations might originate with a physical stimulus, physical stress, but are modulated by a whole set of biological processes that are in turn modulated by a whole set of neural activity. So neural activity, like neurobiological process. If I believe something will work, I'm going to be less stressed when I go into that. I'm going to be, sleep, things like that are going to be less disrupted. And through a whole host of different avenues, you start getting nudged towards more positive adaptation. Whereas if you were anxious about something, if you don't believe in something, if you're like, why the hell am I doing this? And you're subconsciously maybe reducing the amount of physical effort you put into it, et cetera, et cetera. Again, there's a whole host of a whole host of kind of streams and tributaries that start nudging you in a negative direction. And I guess all of that sits outside of our conventional education, where we're not really taught about that. We're taught about, well, if you want to get stronger, this number of sets and reps at this percentage of max, blah, blah, blah. If you want to get fitter, you need to do this type of session. Yeah, it's important and we need to think about those things, but we've conventionally really emphasized this as if it's the only thing and really de-emphasized the fact that, well, actually, how much the athlete trusts you is fundamental. Whether they'll follow you is fundamental, not just and it's not a kind of a fluffy nice to do. It is a fundamental part of you being a successful coach, trainer, S&C, rehabber, or, physio, whatever your role might be.
Yeah, it's plenty to go into with that, but I guess in terms of when did the penny drop for you as a coach, where you recognise those softer skills, how impactful they can be, and how important it is to develop a relationship with those in front of you, to have confidence and trust in your processes?
It's very hard to say when the penny dropped, because it probably kind of, dropped a tiny bit and then stuck and then dropped another little bit later. But what I would say is I spent a lot of time, and this would be from my kind of mid-teens, reading kind of whatever sports literature I could get at. And at the time, this was all the old Soviet stuff, periodization, et cetera, and it was very dogmatic and very prescriptive. And if you do this, and I was out, in my backyard, or, setting up all these types of circuits as per this old white Soviet that I'd never met. And like I was a true believer. But then, you go through a load of life experiences. And if I was to pick one thing, I would say is, around kind of maybe 2002, 2008, maybe I was exposed to a lot of really successful coaches. as in, multiple Olympic goals. And in their programs, it was part of my role to, be looking at programs and talking to them about their programs. It was very hard to find a common thread. They all had very different beliefs. And it's like, I kind of had the thing, well, if you're a great coach, it means you have a great training program, and that's what gets your athletes successful. But there was very few commonalities, even within very similar event groups or very similar sports. And I guess that was something that nudged that penny to drop a bit more. It was like, well, maybe what great coaches have in common isn't necessarily their technical ability, but their ability to inspire, their ability to get athletes to follow, to buy in, the ability for them to raise their athletes' expectations, the ability to kind of help shape a shared direction that the athlete thinks, oh yeah, this is where I want to go, and this coach is helping me to get there. And I think once you have that, then you have something that you can work on. How perfect your training program has to be, I think you should make it as perfect as you can, for your beliefs. But I think there's a lot else that's going on outside of the mechanical description of that program that leads to future success. And just to kind of drive that home, I've worked with coaches, again, of similar success levels. And again, we're talking Olympic gold, Olympic silver, or a lot of team sport international success. And let's say you have, they have completely different philosophies. They might do vaguely the same type of stuff, like everyone does a bit of strength training. And if you're a footballer, you'll do some small-sided games. So maybe there's technical commonalities, but philosophy, how they're delivered, how they're laid out, completely different. You transition back to the literature, and it's like, this is the best thing to do in this situation, or this is the best thing to do in this situation. And I guess what becomes clear after a couple of decades with your head down is, hey, there is no this is the best. There isn't even a need there isn't a need. That's not even a right way to think about this. There is no best. There is just what is the best guess for now, and then how are we going to evaluate that pretty quickly, learn from it pretty quickly, adapt, change. And it's just maybe trying to plot an evolutionary path rather than map out this is what we're going to do for this season or for this Olympic quadrennial.
Yeah, so it's not like there's a model to follow.
Yeah, was that humbly enough?
Yeah, no, that's great. It's such a fascinating topic to dive into in terms of, for a developing coach or a coach of any level. I guess there's continual improvement where you can grow from that aspect of how can you inspire someone, because like you said before, it's not just physical differences, but it's their psychological differences, their personality differences, how to engage that person and get buy-in. Do you feel like those skill sets as the coach are just as trainable as the technical side in terms of like your coaching eye and your ability to communicate what you're seeing with the athlete in front of you?
That's actually a great question. And I'll tell you why. And I know I'm generalizing ridiculously, but if you go to most organizations or certification bodies and how you train the various professions around physical adaptation, whether it's technical coaches or S&Cs or rehabbers or whatever it might be, it's a very mechanically driven process. And there might be, and there's more and more these days, there's a little kind of tip your hat to, well, obviously there's psychological issues and there's emotional issues, but they're generally underplayed, and we don't really get any guidelines of how we can be better, and we don't get any training in it. I'll give you two examples, and you mentioned one of them, communication. I work with a guy called Brett Bartholomew, who's in the States. Don't know if you've come across Brett's work, but that's Brett's business. How do I teach coaches? And he works with other domains, business, firefighters, etc. How do I teach people to communicate? Now, you think they're like, hey, communicate as a coach, communication is the water you swim in, right? You communicate all the time. And if you're a bad communicator, there's going to be mixed messages. The picture you have in your head doesn't efficiently go into the athlete's head. The belief that you have, the direction you have, none of that is transmitted properly. It's the water we swim in, but we're not trained to swim. As we're growing up as coaches, we don't get anything. And as far as I know, Brett's is the only kind of educational course that is offered to coaches. So that's one thing. Decision making. So how we communicate all the time, we also make decisions as coaches all the time. Okay, so when have you ever been tutored in, these are the basic principles of good decision making, or these are the common faults in decision making? And all these things are known in other domains, like there's a decision making literature going back 90 years. We know a lot about decision making, and it's been revolutionized in the last kind of 10 or 12 years. But we don't, even though we make decisions all the time, that's our job effectively, we don't get any education in it. And again, I work with a couple of folks in sport, Ryan King, Alan McDonald, PJ Wilson. And again, those guys are all experienced practitioners, and they're all interested in, okay, well, in my domain, in my particular sport, how can I make that decision-making better just by introducing some basic decision-making principles? And, you know, this could be, just to put a little bit of meat on that, it could be just teaching people when do you actually need to make a decision? Like, what's the timeline? Do you need to make a decision now? Okay. How are you emotionally? Are you hot? Okay. If you're hot, then you don't want to make an important decision now. And you think about it, we do it as coaches all the time. I'm a bit pissed off with this person because of X, Y, or Z. And I'm a little bit kind of, narky with them. And maybe I'm going to push them a little harder than I should today. And you start making bad decisions based on these emotions that are bubbling under, or it could be that you got a bad night's sleep, or all these type of things that you carry into your coaching inevitably, and that distort your perspective, distort how you make decisions. And I've seen one really clear example: coach pissed off with athlete, I should say ex-Olympic gold medalist, in the run-up to an Olympics, away in training camp. They were getting on one another's nerves. Coach forced him to do one more rep. No, you have to do another one, you have to do another one, hamstring, or maybe it wasn't hamstring. I won't give you the injury actually, but blew up, gone. Olympic 4-year cycle, dead and buried.
Yeah.
Why? Because these two people were irritating one another. And the person in control kind of said, okay, well, I'm going to teach them a lesson type thing. And that happens all the time. That was just a spectacularly influential error. So I've gone the long way around saying, I think that there's so much more education that we need as coaches. Communication is one of them, a very obvious one. Decision-making is another obvious one. But of course, there's others. But historically, we've come from a place where we believe that the adaptations you get and whether you realize your potential is down to the physical work you do. And of course it is. No one has taken that away. But the physical work you do it's not more important than the set of beliefs and confidences and biases and kind of buy-in expectations that are all wrapped around the coach-athlete relationship and the athlete's faith in the coach. And just to draw a line under that kind of long diversion, you'll often see it if you look, especially in the team sports. If you were to pick one thing from a coach for a coach to have to make a difference, it would be have the confidence of the players. And often that confidence comes because there's all these kind of legends attached to coaches. Oh, they did this, or they're coming off a winning streak, and that creates an aura, and that lasts. You get a new coach in, and normally you get a little bump in results because they come with a reputation. But obviously that doesn't last. That's not sustainable unless there is some substance there as well. And we often see that kind of roller coaster of this coach gets success, so they get this bigger job, and then they're gone after 6 months because they couldn't hack the bigger job. We see that kind of boom and bust cycle all the time, instead of, I think, coaches believing less about their own press and more about, okay, how do I develop as a coach, and where do I need to develop, and what are my weak links? And these weak links aren't where we conventionally think them. They're in things like decision-making ability, communication ability. Okay, that was another long rant. I hope that made a bit of sense.
No, it does. I'd like to go back to the injury moment. Do you think, in your experience, like, obviously you can't quantify this, but just in terms of gut feel, if for that preparation for the Olympics, if the athlete and the coach were humming along, there's good vibes, there's strong connection, strong trust, all that, or that psychosocial aspect is in a really good place, that one extra rep may not have tipped him over the edge?
You can't say that. I couldn't say that, because it's always a confluence of factors.
Sure.
But I will, I mean, if we look at something like coordination, so coordination for me, again, I'm in danger of going off on another mad tangent here, but coordination to me is everything. It's like this super capacity that all other capacities are facilitated by. Like, your endurance is related to your coordination, your strength, expression, your ability to change direction or decelerate. They're all fundamentally related to coordination, but we don't really talk about coordination a lot. So coordination is basically just your body and brain's ability to communicate and move in a way that is non-risky and efficient and gets the job done. So it's a kind of triangulation between those. So you mentioned my gut feel about that injury. Well, my gut feel would be, coaches get away with that type of stuff all the time.
Yeah.
But it's not good enough to think, oh, well, I got away with it, so it was the right decision. If you were to be clinical about it, what you would do is think, hang on, before I make this decision, I need to pause. I need to check my emotions. Yes, I am pissed off with that person. Okay, that's not a good thing. Distance myself from that emotion. Then it's going to be, okay, well, what's the reward? Well, the reward is this person gets another rep in. We're maybe 6 weeks out from Olympics or whatever. So it's one more rep in a 4-year cycle. Does that make a blind bit of difference? Well, I won't say it's nothing, but the difference it will make is likely infinitesimal. What's the likely risk? Okay, well, he's been complaining, he's tired, he's been, he has some awareness on that leg. Okay, so it's an asymmetric reward risk, if you like, balance. The reward is something small. And in the coach's head, I think the reward was, I'll teach him a lesson. What's the risk? Okay, the risk is disproportionately high. Impossible to directly quantify, but it's disproportionately high. What's the right decision? And I'm not saying the right decision is always pull back, because it's not. And if you pull back too much, too often, then you create athletes that aren't robust because they don't get enough, time on task. So you have to weigh all these things off, and you have to do it quickly. But the first thing you have to do is step back and take a breath and go, okay, this is an important decision. I need to think about it. It can't be driven by my emotions. It can't be driven by a knee jerk.
Yeah, so it takes a lot of self-awareness.
Yeah, but it does. And the thing is, and I'm not pointing the finger at any coaches, we're not educated to even think like that. We're kind of educated in a way that it's all gut. You mentioned the phrase gut feel. It's all gut feel. And if you have success, you must be good at the gut feel. And that kind of builds up this unjustified self-confidence. And we're all humans are victim to this, and it's clear. And the biggest enemy of good decision-making is decision-making arrogance. It's me feeling, well, I've gotten this decision right 1,000 times before, so I'll make this decision now, and I'm good at decision-making, and my gut is giving me some type of expert intuition. And you investigate that, and it's been investigated, extensively in other complex domains, and we are really bad at gut feel, but we're really good at convincing us that we have this gut instinct that is very effective. And it's just that we kind of edit our success and failures. We're trying to explain away failures. Well, that wasn't my fault. That was because they didn't prepare properly. Whereas if we get something right or feel we get something right, then it's going, oh yeah, that's another tick to kind of prove that I'm a really good decision maker.
And do you think from the athlete's perspective, is there an element of onus on the athlete to say, look, I'm not doing that rep. I'm just going to listen to my body here. And, how do you think of it from that point of view? Obviously, that's it's a coach and an athlete's relationship. It's the coach's responsibility, I guess, to prescribe training and manage the load and all that. And the athlete's doing the right thing, I guess, technically in terms of trusting their coach. But at what point do you back the athlete in to take onus on their own? It's their Olympics at the end of the day.
Okay, that's another really good question, and we're kind of getting into the weeds here, but I do think it's relevant and important, and I think that I don't think that's an event. I don't think it's that like the coach shake hands and go, okay, you're ready. I think it's athlete comes to you and maybe their training age is very young and their training experience is very young, and you need to be a little bit more dictatorial, if you like. But at the same time, you farm out little bits of education. This is why we're doing this. This is how it should feel. This is how it should feel the morning after. If you're having residual, whatever, come and talk to me. So you're starting to build in little bits of education, and you're starting to farm out, okay, I need feedback from you here. So you're building up that kind of feed-forward feedback loop. You're getting a handle on, well, what does this athlete actually believe? Because if you start pushing against their deeply held beliefs, that's a road to nowhere, wasted energy and higher risk. So I think there's that gradually progressive, gentle, nudging approach about, I need to educate this athlete. So the conversation we're having at the start of this season isn't the same as the one we're having next season. The conversation we're having when they're 22 isn't the same as the conversation we're having when they're 30. And you're gradually pushing that out. You're gradually farming it out. Okay, you need to make more decisions here. But you can't just start off, athlete comes to your camp, and it could be any age, but they haven't come up in a system where they've been educated or had any, they've never been asked for feedback. You have to kind of get them used to that before it can be effective. But I would think that the most economical, efficient, productive systems that I've worked in have been in ones where the athlete is clearly respected and their perspective is clearly respected. And they make key decisions, not, in a way, well, I'm not doing that, but in a discussion type way, in a feedback feed forward. Now, in some sports, one other consideration is, like, especially team sports, in a really busy competition period, that needs to be in a way that's efficient. The coach doesn't have time to talk to every member of the squad every day before you do training. But there's always shortcuts around that. It's just making the squad aware, okay, we're going into a heavy period. This is what we'll be doing. Any issues, we need to talk about it now in this forum or a different forum. If X, Y, or Z is happening to you, or if, let's say, I don't know, sensitization to some previous injury or residual fatigue, if you feel they're reaching dangerous levels, we need to talk, and we may reduce or we may not. We'll have to look and make a context-specific decision. So there's always ways you can do it in an intelligent way. You can make things very time efficient, regardless of whether you're working with one athlete in an Olympic cycle or you're working with multiple athletes through a heavy competition period.
You touched on earlier how strong of an influence track and field has had on your coaching, as well as the wider industry in performance sports, and also coordination, how important that is. Do you feel like that's one of the gaps in terms of 100 meter, preparing a 100-meter sprinter compared to a rugby football player? Is the different coordination, different shapes and angles they need to hit on the field, and what are some other factors that you need to take into account to improve, I guess, on-field athletic performance for a team
Yeah,
sport
okay,
athlete?
that's a really interesting one. So sprinting is actually a great example because there are such strong stylistic conventions around exactly what a sprinter should look like. And it gets very detailed. And I don't think it's the case that no, there's no conventions. The sprinter just has to figure it out themselves. There was times when I did believe that. There was times, mostly way back when I thought, no, there's a strict template that a sprinter has to match. But the reality is it's probably somewhere in the middle. There are basic shapes you need to hit, purely because that's the way we're designed. But if you like, within those kind of fundamental shapes, there's a lot of individualization in terms of how you get there, how you hit those shapes. So that's sprinting. In something like rugby or football, AFL, whatever it might be, you're hitting multiple shapes under contact while you're making very reflexive decisions. So it's not like it's a very, very different context. But yeah, for me, coordination isn't necessarily what something looks like. It's how it feels under the hood. And is this efficient? Is it achieving its purpose? In terms of, is this movement achieving its purpose? Is it flowing on to the next movement portion in an effective way? And is it dangerous? And all of these things, we have access to all that information in our brain. And it's just by, all the training we do as kids, all the training we do as in professional sports, that really refines your brain and central nervous system's ability to respond without necessarily, I don't think you talk to a football player and tell them, well, we want you to hit this shape when you're moving. I certainly wouldn't. You might give some basic things where you need to get your hips low when you're decelerating, or let's try out those type of things. But really enhancing coordination is about putting them into problems in a gradually progressive way and giving a wide range of movement experiences. Certainly in the open field play sports, not so much I'm a straight line sprinter, that's all I do. It's all about quick acceleration and max speed. I don't know if that got to your question. Did it? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what about from the recovery side of things? What's your stance on recovery for an athlete that's in season, so they're going for that week-to-week performance?
Well, I think it's something we get wrong quite a bit, but it's hard. Again, it sounds like I'm not blaming anyone. It's a very hard problem because, certainly in a team sport setting, different people will recover from different activities and different timescales. But yet we tend to overlay future stress at kind of set times. We're going to do the field session at this time, we'll do the gym session at this time. I think monitoring fatigue, again, that's another complex problem. What type of fatigue you're monitoring, how are you monitoring it? All types of technology now, they all give hints. They're all looking through a keyhole trying to describe a room. The best we can do is have multiple keyholes, but then understand that we could be missing some part of the big picture as well. And for me, I think, again, the way forward, like technology has helped to a degree, but I think the way forward is an educated athlete being asked educated questions by the coach and giving educated feedback and that dialogue. And that sense that this is not about finding an excuse to reduce training. Sometimes we're going to need to pump it up because your long-term, your short-term resilience might be facilitated by giving you more rest, but your long-term resilience may be reduced if we keep giving you too much rest. So you're constantly playing that long-term versus short-term balance, and it's hard to do it. But the way not to do it is some off-the-shelf solution. The machine says no, boom, we're not training today. There needs to be something that's more sensitive, more well calibrated to the athlete. And again, it's the understanding that fatigue doesn't show up For example, I might have no residual fatigue in any of the muscles of my trunk or legs, but my movement will be off because for some reason I have a lot of anxiety. So my movement control will be inhibited. Movement control coordination being inhibited is, it's the best way I know to get injured. So yeah. So again, it's not a physical problem. It's a combination of your perspective, your beliefs, your set of biases and predispositions around those beliefs and around how you feel and around how scared or confident or nervous you feel about going into specific movements, or the sensitization that you might be getting. Your brain is getting pinged because, oh, it's my knee, I had a previous whatever on my knee, and then it's my knee's starting to go again, and then that kind of builds up an avalanche of momentum, and all of a sudden you're becoming overly sensitized to this particular little signal that doesn't necessarily mean anything, or might not necessarily mean anything other than you hurt this years ago, and now your brain is really sensitized to any type of signal from that area. So again, I'm going off on another tangent, but again, it's just all bringing back movement, injury risk, performance, fitness. They're not just physical things. It's physical wrapped around in a cocoon of beliefs, biases, predispositions, expectations, prior experiences, and a lot of them are false. A lot of them hark back to, I broke my arm when I was a kid, or my elbow, and now I'm really sensitive to any pain there. Oh no, that's my elbow again. Oh no, it's going to get worse. Oh no, I won't be able to throw, something like that. Again, I better stop there because I'm definitely going off in tangents. Can I just check back with you? Did that make a degree of sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think what you touched on there in terms of empowering the athlete to speak up and the coach in that conversation, and how important that is in terms of you want to have all your hints and your objective markers, but ultimately that conversation of looking under the hood, I think you framed it as, with the athlete checking in. When you are managing a large group and you want to empower the athletes to be able to speak up, for the younger athletes, I guess, how do you sort of educate them on certain things that are okay soreness the next day, like you mentioned residual soreness, and things that you really need to communicate to the team so we can help you manage and influence, I guess, decisions?
Well, I guess there's probably a couple of approaches. First of all, what you do is try and, for example, a very pragmatic thing would be, okay, let's get a scale on this. If this is something that's recurring, you have a history of prior hamstrings, and now, a third of the way into a game, you feel your hamstring starting to tighten up. So maybe we put a kind of a rating around that, and that could be a scale that we develop. The important thing is that when you say, okay, well, it's whatever it is, 6 out of 10, that the coach understands kind of what you mean, and that can only come out in gradual conversation. Now that gives you some very fluffy but subjective measure that someone can lock onto and use to kind of gauge where they are, but also they'll learn that, well, actually, it always goes to 6, but that doesn't stop me playing. It's fine. So that gives you a kind of a little bit of positive feedback. So I think we undervalue the worth of those subjective measures, not so much as an empirical tool to tell me exactly where your hamstring is at the moment, but more as a longer term educational tool. Yeah, it's a 6. Yeah, but you know what? 6 is fine because I always get through stuff when it's 6. It's only when it gets to 8 that I really need to worry. You can only arrive at that point, that kind of more perceptive, insightful, regulated point, if you go through some kind of learning process first. And what I'd say is sometimes having that measure, and the criticism is like, well, it's so subjective, it doesn't mean anything. But the thing about having that measure is it kind of impels the athlete to think about, well, how is it actually feeling? Okay, again, it's a 6. But they start to deconstruct, well, why is it feeling like that? And that's much better than just going, there's my hamstring starting again. Because now you can start to build in, okay, well, look, is there something we can do before training or the night before training to try and reduce that? And it just gives you a kind of an anchor around which you can suddenly start to modulate other things to see what works and what doesn't. And with, I was going to say nearly every athlete, but with a large portion of athletes, there's always going to be injuries. There's always going to be those type of things, pain, residual discomfort. They're always going to be there, especially towards the back end of careers, and especially in some sports. But I think what we have done in professional sport is foster the fear of these, like a fear of your brain saying, oh, your knees a bit uncomfortable. And we don't have to be afraid of them. We have to be aware of them, but we don't have to be afraid of them. And sometimes if you get an injury, you're always going to have sensitivity there. It doesn't necessarily mean the injury is getting worse or risk is getting higher. So we need to kind of educate ourselves. We need to explore these things with the athlete in a little more detail. Now, if I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, yeah, but I don't have time for that. Okay, you don't have time to do it perfectly, but you always have time to, okay, how can we evolve processes at the club that start to unpick this? And, that subjective monitoring is a good way of doing it. There's one other interesting sideline here that has come up quite a bit in the past few years, and that's mental fatigue. Like, what is mental fatigue? Is it related to physical fatigue? And, it's obviously they're related, but if you measure them, they're slightly different things. Now, mental fatigue can be brought on by you have had to make a lot of decisions, or there's a lot of anxiety building up to this game, or it's a really big game, or it's your first World Cup, or yada, 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 all these type of things. And that, because it is a stress, exerts an influence on everything, the decisions you make, your mood, how you move, how you coordinate, the kind of the really quick decisions you'll make during a game. Mental fatigue affects those things, and your performance declines and your injury risk goes up. What do you do about mental fatigue? We've all these strategies about, what you do with physical fatigue, and that's another whole shit show that sits over there. But with the mental fatigue, what do you do about mental fatigue? And not so easy. Again, we need education there. There are strategies. But maybe a key take home would be, and this happens quite a lot, if it's coming up to a big event, there's going to be a lot more stress on people, like Olympics, cup final, whatever it might be. Mental fatigue is, just because of environment, is going to be higher. Stress levels are going to be higher. The coach tends to get nervous. And again, I'm sure you've seen it, I've seen it multiple times. Coach gets nervous under pressure, so the coach talks to the players more and more and more and more and more instructions and more detailed instructions, and don't forget to do this. And really it is the coach kind of transmitting mental fatigue and stress to the player. So totally non-productive. Whereas the coach would be going, whoa, now I need to be an example of how to carry myself under pressure. Regardless of what's going on under the hood, I just need to be, we're good. We've done this 1,000 times. This is not a problem. This is what we do. Just slot into your routine, get into your normal habits, go through your normal process. Boom, we'll be good. But it often happens the other way. No, this game is really important. We have to remember to do this, and don't forget to do that. And you need to cover this man back every single time, and keep amplifying rather than dampening stress, anxiety, information overload.
It seems to be something that's become quite relevant throughout the whole chat, in terms of having that awareness and then being able to make sure that you don't sort of project your own emotions and what's going on under the hood in front of your athletes or to your athletes, but being able to have a second to think and be a bit more, I guess, collected before you make rash decisions. What have you found effective for maybe coaches that haven't built up that awareness yet of where their emotions sort of take control, and what are some effective strategies to be able to be aware and maybe have a second to think before reacting?
Well, if I was to look back on my history, what I would think is, I think there was years when I was a bad coach. I was a bad coach because I kind of fell for the illusion that, oh, I'm quite good at this, and I've good experience and I've worked with good athletes, so I must be good. Instead of kind of thinking, hang on a sec, working with good people, being with successful athletes, luck is a chunk of that, a big chunk. It doesn't mean you're good. If you want to be better, then what do I need to do to be better? Well, I need to dissect what I do, and that includes my thought processes, how I react, how I communicate, and I need to have objectives. If I'm going training, if I'm going to coach a squad, then I need to go through the same process as they do. I don't need to do a physical warm-up. I definitely need to do a mental warm-up. It may be that, I'm carrying stress from at home, or, some argument with your partner, whatever it might be. I need a way to clear that. I need to get all that crap out of my way, because for me, coaching is a performance, and it's not about me being me. It's me being the best coach I can be. Now that sounds like very kind of, I don't know, stick your fingers down the throat and throw up type stuff. But what I mean is, what do I need to do to be able to handle this coaching session and deliver the best possible product for the athlete? And that could be changing my mood, forgetting the stress about, oh, geez, the traffic, blah, blah, blah. Having some way of clearing all that aside so you can make good, clear decisions. I guess this may sound ridiculously simple, but the best hack that I've come across in the past 15 years or so is just, I'll always have a little notebook just tucked into my waistband. And if an athlete says something to me, I write it down. If there's follow-up needed, I'll write it down. And any small thing I notice, I'll write it down. And then that night, I'll go through it and I'll put it into an A4 for the next day. And what that does is, just in a very simple way, if you're in a busy camp, you have thousands of interactions potentially a day. Some of them will be important. You'll need to remember. I used to always assume, I'll remember that. But then how do you know if you didn't remember something? A lot of the time it won't come back to bite you. It'll just be the athlete said, well, I said that to him a couple of days ago, but he never got back to me. And that kind of is one of these little things that starts to erode the athlete's faith and trust and perception of you as someone who is diligent and really cares about what's right for them. So yeah, I mean, I think, what have I said there? There's the building relationships piece. There's about the coach getting ready for the session and treating
it as a warm-up.
Yeah. I mean, and it evolves over time, but I would have a step-by-step process. If I was going into a camp, I would have my objectives for the camp. How will I know if I did well? Not if the team did well, but what are the metrics by which I will know if I did well? And they can't be someone else's metrics. Someone gives you a pat in the back or something like that. It's like, okay, well, I know my weaklings. I need to correct them. Like, I tend to be a bit ditzy, as you probably have gathered. I'm good at thinking about all these different things, but sometimes I forget the thing in front of me. So I need to stay really, really focused. So if I was in a camp, for example, I'd have a this is oversharing now in a big way, but I'd have a kind of a routine. When I wake up, first thing I do is I look at the A4 page I filled out the day before. What are my key things for today? Then, get your stuff ready for training. And then I'd be walking to training. I'd be going through I'd be clearing out all the crap. I'd be saying, okay, what decisions do I need to make? What decisions need to be made quickly, and what can be parked until slower time when I can work through them in the way that they deserve, because they're hard decisions or big decisions. And then I'll have my notebook, and then that night I'll transcribe all my notes from that. And that's, I guess, a basic skeleton of a day. But it's not about the detail of my process. It's just having a process, and maybe having a way to evaluate yourself. An evaluation could be, again, at the start of a campaign, you set your objectives for your performance. And depending on the length, maybe at some junctures in between or at the end of that, you evaluate that. And it's just you evaluating you. And it's like, what did I do well? Okay, I'm going to give myself a pat on the back for that. What did I do badly? Okay, I need to. And then obviously the next step from that is, how do I get better at this? What do I need to fix? Yeah. So again, a big rambly answer to a short question.
No, it's good. There's some gems there for sure for anyone that works in the coaching realm. I think that mental warm-up's not something I've heard of before, but it does resonate in terms of coaching his performance, and then have a process that you can stick to that's not relying on others. Like you said, it's not a pat on the back from someone else, but it's your clear areas of focus to how to win the day, I guess, and then reflecting on it at the end of the day and having areas you can improve and taking notes. I think that also resonated for me as well. That's something I like to do, where you will get hit with a lot of pieces of information on the gym floor or on the field, and if you don't write them down, they're impossible to remember when you're in the heat of the coaching realm. That's for sure.
Well, yeah, I think that was kind of I don't want to say a breakthrough, but that was a good one for me, because you get information and you always think at the time, I remember that. That's no problem.
Yeah.
But you don't have to keep score. You don't follow up a couple of days later and say, was there something that I forgot? Because you forgot it. So So I think those type of hacks do work really well. And from the athlete's perspective is, well, I kind of said that. It was only a minor comment, but he came back to me. Okay. It doesn't matter, but yeah, it shows professionalism, diligence, and we need to project that. The athlete's career in the time that you're working with them is the biggest thing in their life.
Yeah.
They're looking at coaches and technical coaches and medical staff, and they're thinking in a very root-based way, are they the best person to help me? Can they help me reach my longer-term objectives? And if not, if they have some kind of signal in their head that say, no, not really. Oh, no, he doesn't like me, or she doesn't like me, or I don't understand what they ever say, or they don't listen. That's really toxic. That is really toxic. And, we could easily have come on and talked about, technique this and sets and reps and durations that, but, that's kind of the trivia in a sense. I'm not saying it's not important, but, you push them a little bit more, but not too much every day physically, and they'll get better. But there's this whole other world that we're not educated on. You do any of the conventional courses. There's nothing on decision-making, nothing on communication, very, very little on the non-physical influences on physical adaptation. So we've only really started. We've kind of dived too much into this deep end of technical form, sets, reps, etc., and we've neglected this whole other bit, which is the art of coaching. And looping back to where we came in at the start, it's the non-physical stuff that for me characterizes the truly great coaches from the lucky great coaches.
And I guess before we wrap it up, you mentioned Brett Bartholomew's work in terms of communication. Are there some other standout resources that coaches that want to improve in this aspect, the softer side, the communication, decision-making, I guess self-awareness and being able to control your emotions, and I guess performance of coaching?
I guess the obvious thing to do is refer people to, there's this whole decision-making literature over there, but that's a mire, that's a big undertaking. I guess I think it is, for me, if I just look back at me, there was that typical early career arrogance where I thought I was good on the basis of bugger all evidence. And it's very easy for us as humans to take in positive feedback and excuse or explain away negative feedback. Well, that wasn't really my fault. That was actually, that type of thing. So I think overconfidence is a killer. So that's the first thing I would do, is wind it back. And again, it's just awareness. We don't do it consciously. It's not like we're all big-headed, but it's a natural human tendency. If you work at something and you think you plan something, you agree with that plan, you think that plan is right, unless you go and actively look for negative critical feedback, you're going to drift along in this bubble where, well, all my decisions are right. Because it's so easy to explain away, well, it would have worked if that didn't happen, and that was out of my control. Those type of little things.
100%.
So I guess there's so much for us to work on in coaches. I would think it's awareness. It all starts with self-awareness. I think it all starts with curiosity, willingness to learn, willingness to look outside of convention a lot of the time, because our conventions are rudimentary. We're a very young science. We kind of, because we live in a short time scale, we kind of think, well, sports science has been around for whatever, 40 years, let's say. That's a long time. No, it's not. We're only scratching the surface of this. And, we're going to have to be really open to what's happening now with AI and machine learning. And in a world of big data and cloud computing, things are going to change pretty quick. But some things might not change. And I think that building a sense of purpose, shared mission, ensuring, not in a way that is like acting, but in a way that is reflective of your mission as a coach. I want to service this athlete's needs. I think that stuff, that's not going to go away. And that's the fundamental building block. That's the foundation of good coaching, regardless if you're working with kids who no one will ever hear of, or if you're working with, top athletes in the world. That's, for me, the fundamental ingredient to effective good coaching.
What a way to wrap it up. I think we might leave it there, John. We had our difficulties, but we persisted, and I'm glad we had this chat. For those that aren't aware, we had a bit of hiatus halfway through, but we stuck at it, which I really appreciate you sticking around, John, and having this chat. For those that have any follow-up questions for you, John, is there a best place to get in contact in terms of social media?
I'm on Twitter at Simply Sportsci, and I'm on Instagram on the same handle.
Perfect. We'll add the links in the show notes.
If folks have any questions, I realise I went in a lot of different tangents, and I'm sure a lot of things weren't clear. But if there's anything I can do to help, feel free to contact me. No,
I think you've created a lot of lateral thinking, which is really important. Like you said, the sets and reps and all those technical sides, they are important early on, but what makes greatness is the stuff that's working with your athletes and being able to build that buy-in, that people side. So I really appreciate that. It's definitely got me thinking, and I've got 2 pages full of notes that I'm looking forward to digesting. So, for those that have tuned in, if you missed the start of this episode, it will live on our YouTube channel, and then we'll post it on our podcast in a coming Wednesday in 3 weeks' time. And our next live chat is with Jacob Jennings, who's a sports scientist at the Brisbane Broncos. That's next Thursday, the 15th of June. So make sure to tune in for that one, 3 p.m. Australian Standard Time. Thanks again, John.
My pleasure.